The L-shaped bar part 2, where I'll cover the feet, the wine rack and interior shelving, and of course, the bar tops. Let's get into it. We'll start off with the feet. They consist of 7 6-inch tapered feet connected by a series of skirts and stretchers. I decided to keep the joints simple using 1/2-inch dowels. Time to prep and square the lumber.
Start it up!
Once ready, I cut 7 of the feet a little bit longer than their final length and set up my taper jig to give each foot a slight taper below the skirt line. Wait, what? Then, cut them all to exact length. And gave each piece, including the stretchers and skirts, a round over. As I take all these pieces to a finishing level sand down, I'd like to invite you guys to like, subscribe, and ring the bell if you haven't since part 1. I'm already working on new designs and shop projects, and I love hearing and learning from you guys, so feel free to leave a comment below. Okay, back to it. Once ready, I laid out all the pieces and marked not only the cut side, but also the edges on which I'd later align the mortising jig to ensure a good dowel connection. Then started to cut the mortises.
Start it up!
I did the same to the skirts.
This is lit!
Before I glue up. Do you see it? The problem? Because I sure didn't. Once I got the frame glued, incorrectly, I added countersinks to attach the skirts and stretchers to the bottom of the cabinet. Whew, that's better. All fixed. Do you see it now? What I did wrong before? Because it embarrassingly took me to this step of screwing the feet into the cabinet to notice that I had laid the feet framework out completely backwards the first time. With the feet done, it was time to get to the wine rack. Using a series of lap-jointed shelves and supports, I created the frame for the wine rack. This whole unit would slide in behind the open panel of the short side of the bar. I started by gluing up the panels that would later become the shelves. While those dried, I got to work on the support lap joints. To make sure the wine rack sat centered on the short side face, I made the interior marks of the top and bottommost lap joints the same distance apart as the short side opening. Then, using the depth of the gluing shelves, I marked the outer edge of the lap joint. With that done, I took the total interior distance and divided by 2 to get the center lap joint marked. I divided the shelf depth by 2 and marked either side of the center point. I did the same for the remaining lap joints. Then I marked half the full width of the support on each cut mark and got to the careful router work of cutting them out. After getting one support done, I could use it as a template for the rest, making an easier job of placing 45 remaining lap joints. I did use my sharper gouge bit to clear some of the excess before switching to the precision trimmer bit. With those ready, I switched back to the shelf panels, trimming them down to size. Then going through the same process to mark the lap joints on both long edges. And the same process again to cut out the joints, though I got lazy and didn't switch out the router bits this time. With all the cuts made, I gave everything a good sanding and finished each piece individually. Before putting all the lap joints together. And that's the last of the wine rack for now. On to the countertops. Like the bottom of the cabinet, the first larger lower countertop will be joined by a mitered corner to create the L shape. Let's start by gluing up the two panels of the lower counter. I was close as it was, but I actually misjudged how off square the major boards of this countertop were, and ended up needing to eliminate more width than I originally thought I could get away with. So that butcher block stripe was both a necessity and a happy accident to get the countertop to fit the cabinet. Once glued, I trimmed each panel down to size, again cutting one edge of each at the 45-degree miter. Then marked and added slots for placement biscuits. But before creating the L shape, I ran each piece through this router contraption to level off the countertop and make finishing work a little easier. Then glued them together. While that dries, the upper countertop will sit atop 3 curved supports, joined by 2 skirts that will sit in slot joints in the supports. I'll use a series of sunken screws through both the top and bottom countertop to the supports to connect them, and then plug all visible sinks with some 1/2-inch plugs. Again, the upper countertop design was a bit of a happy accident. While trying to fix the bottom counter problem, I ended up ruining the lumber I set aside for the upper, so a kind of butcher block it was. I used the planer to clean up the uneven surfaces. Then trimmed it down to size. To get started on the supports, I used a circle cutting jig and the router to cut the curved edges. Then cut them down to size. Added the slots for the skirts, and finally gave them a round over and sand down. With the pieces prepped, it was time to glue. I added plugs in the bottom of the slot joint to help keep the skirts level. Back to the big countertop. With the miter glued, I flipped the countertop over and marked the placement for the countersinks. I did this before rounding over the edges to make for more precise measurements. I did the same for the upper countertop, making my marks on the upward face. Then, cut the sinks for the upper counter so I could give all of the exposed counter faces their round over and finishing level sand downs and not worry about erasing my marks. With that done, I connected the supports to the upper countertop. Then cut room for the screws in the underside of the bottom countertop. And got to work connecting the upper unit to the lower. I screwed the screws in just far enough to barely poke through. Then, when I flipped it right way up, I could easily place the upper unit in the right spot. With the successful connection, I cut away the cured plugs. And did one final finishing sand down before switching to the interior shelves. I kept these shelves pretty basic, using just cabinet-mounted and single-point supports. To add a little funky flair, I used the router and circle cutting bit to curve the outer edge of each shelf panel. Then sanded them down. Placed the cabinet mounts. And the single point mounts. And secured them in place. Finally, time for finishing. With every piece finished, I slid the wine rack into place. Then used L brackets to secure the countertop to the cabinet, some of which were a bit tricky to install. As a final interior accent, I decided to add a wine glass rack. Using some offcuts, I cleared enough space on either long edge to fit the foot of a hanging stemmed wine glass. Then, used screws to install these pieces, leaving space enough between them for the glasses. And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. For more DIY projects and shop upgrades, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And I love hearing from you guys, so feel free to leave me a comment below. Until next time.